We are going to talk today, Kevin's going to talk today, about differentiating MyStar lesson for EL students, some tools and tactics um, for EL students, and then we'll have lots of time for interactive discussion. And so I think most of you know me. I'm Chris Gear. I'm the MyStar professional learning coordinator, and Lindsay is with me today. Lindsay watches, my partner in crime. She also she's a MyStar curriculum developer, and she always works with me on the learning series. And we have a number of other MyStar staff here today because this is something that we need to learn about also and want to learn about and want to be better at. I went to Kevin Knack is with us here today from Kalamazoo Schools. And Kevin has worked with MyStar for many years, and he's one of our master teachers. And he did a presentation at MSTA last spring on EL, working with EL students, specifically with MyStar. And I was blown away. It was an amazing presentation. He had all kinds of great things to say, stuff that I had never, really thought about or heard of or whatever. And so we invited him to come back this fall and share this with all of you. So I am going to turn this over to Kevin, and he's going to give you all kinds of great stuff, and keep your questions kind of in mind, and we'll give you some time to chat when we're done. All right, Kevin.
All right, welcome. Fair warning, I'm used to doing this in person and not online, so if there's any technical hiccups and rough edges, a little bit of forgiveness on that. So, ELL in the science classroom. Hopefully by the end of this, you guys are going to have an idea about how you can adapt a 5E lesson or a MyStar format lesson into something our ELL students will gain value from. And when I'm speaking of ELL students, I mean from a wide spectrum of ability. There is we're going to introduce the SIOP protocols to you, so you have kind of an idea on where this is coming from and what the research and the ideas are about it. And the big one, which I really, really try to emphasize, is we're going to talk about what it actually looks like in the classroom. We're going to dig into some solid examples by dissecting a MyStar lesson and hopefully give you something practical that you can walk away here from, or at least something very tangible that you can sink your teeth into. First thing to understand is Millwood. My middle school is a newcomer nexus. And what that means is middle school aged ELL students tend to get funneled to our school. We're not the only one in the district with ELL students, but we get a lot of them. And these students range from individuals that have been in the country for years, all the way to individuals that arrived in the country last week. So there is a very, very wide spectrum of ability. There's a wide spectrum of experiences. There's a wide spectrum of situations, and we need to address that. The other thing to point out is that for many, many, many years, I've been teaching for a long time, multilingual students meant Spanish speakers. The differentiation, the accommodation was, here's your Spanish textbook, here's a Spanish to English dictionary, and that was our ML training. And in today's world, that's not how it is. We get students from all over the world at this point. Refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Congo, Nigeria, basically any place that is in turmoil and having issues, we're collecting students from. We collect students from Mexico, in Central America. We collect students where the parents are university worker or are going to university, or they're working at a university, they're highly educated and they're over here for opportunities. We get students that literally ran towards a plane with an open cargo bay, and they didn't know where the plane was going. They just knew it was not where they were. So we've had to develop some robust strategies to deal with that. The first thing I'm going to bring up is how we structure it at middle school for my school. You may or may not be somebody that is able to influence this I am seeing this sort of program pop up more and more as I go to these conferences, though. Our newcomer students, our brand new ones, start out with sheltered learning. And really, a lot of that is cultural. It's learning that you go to school every day at the same time every day. It's learning what the expectations in the bathroom are and the expectations in the hallway are and personal space and hygiene and just everything that is how to function in an American middle school. These students are brought, the different topics are introduced, but they're essentially, it's sheltered learning. It is isolated. It's kind of a closed off room. As they accommodate and as they start to pick up the language and as they start to understand how to be a student in the US, we start bleeding them into our classes. So we have, they typically start with elective classes, things like art and gym. Again, just kind of getting them used to this idea of this is what a more mainstream class tends to look like. And then we start just bring them into more and more of the mainstream classes. Science tends to be one of the early ones that they bring in, mainly due to the hands-on nature and the ability to, I guess, show instead of or do instead of show. As they progress, we move them into more and more mainstream parapro support, where eventually, hopefully, they don't need any supports at all. You might not have this. Many schools are looking at things like this, but you might have a building where you have one ELL coordinator. You might not have that. Maybe you share a coach, or it's somebody up in admin that pops in every once in a while. Everybody's a little bit different. The big thing, if I have to drive home anything, is that your multilingual students are not identical. And when I first started dipping my toes into this multilingual world, this was something I'd never thought of. First thing to consider is that not all of your students can read anything. They might not be literate in their primary language, much less English. The students may have gotten support and they may have been here for several years and they may not have. If you have a student that transferred schools, you don't necessarily know what they got. There's not a lot of consistency as to how they were acclimated, how they were bridged in, and how they were moved into the classrooms. Multilingual students are kids. Some of them are super motivated. Some of them not so much. They're apathetic. They don't see the point of school. They'd rather do phone and friends than anything. They run that whole spectrum. Some of your MLs are sped. That's a fun trip trying to figure out which ones have the learning disabilities, which ones have the need 504s, need IEPs. Is there trouble because of a language barrier, or is there trouble something that is special education related? Some of them, we mentioned earlier, they've had huge trauma, huge upheaval in their lives. Some of them, it's a planned, structured, organized move. So you have a wide variety. And the biggest thing to understand is that they do have families that care. They do have people that care about them. And it is your responsibility, it's our responsibility to give them an education. We can't get indignant and think that, well, this kid doesn't speak the language yet, so I'm just going to tuck him in a corner and give him some coloring sheets and hope he does okay. We have to give him an education, and it takes a little bit of a boost to make it valuable and appropriate. So the first thing I'm going to do is a couple of general strategies. Out of everything that you use, Google Translate is absolutely the necessary one. That's what you need. This is the one that you are going to use the most often. This is the one your students are going to use the most often. I wish, if I was in a room right now, I'd ask for hands to be raised and how many of you actually have used Google Translate. But we're going to start with go to Google, type in Google Translate, and I want you to copy and paste the message there into Google Translate. And then let's paste that in the chat once you have it. So go ahead, cut and paste the message there. I believe that was Arabic, might be Farsi, but I think it's Arabic. And type the translated message right into chat there. We are very, very fortunate at Millwood. We have one-to-one technology. The kids have all gotten Chromebooks as kind of once COVID hit, everyone has technology, everyone has electronics. If you do not have Chromebooks available, you can get Google Translate on your phone. It's kind of neat because you can literally hold up your phone to whatever language or message or whatever it is that you're trying to translate, and it will auto translate it right off the bat for you. So if you do nothing else, be familiar with this idea of Google Translate and that it works. It is not weird for me to be sitting with a student next to, I have a Chromebook between us, and we'll be typing messages back and forth into Google Translate. Sometimes that's the level you're at. That's the level that you need to go through. It is brilliant for students that struggle to understand the directions. So if you are you have the kid there and they're just sort of sitting and staring off into space, they're being very polite, but they're not actually doing anything. Bring up the Google Translate, have that message. You don't have to write War and Peace in there, but a couple of sentences to understand what the issue is and to get them going. Tremendously effective. In addition to Google Translate, there are different phone apps. There are different programs that are emerging. Talking Points is something that I haven't used a whole lot. I honestly just tend to use Google Translate and send emails. But I do know that teachers in our building use Talking Points. It is a texting program. You log into the Talking Points program. You set the language, and it will translate texts in real time. It's a little bit more fluid. I like Google Translate. It's taken me a lot to kind of dynamite me out of using it. But the teachers I talk to that use the Talking Points, they like that quite a bit. So you have ELL. What are you going to do when you have 10,000 different students with 10,000 different languages? Like, what's the strategy? So this is what one of our art teachers does, and it is a instruction board for the week that has all of the instructions in a variety of languages available for the students to look at and to pick up. I will warn you ahead of time. If you try to use your phone for Google Translate and it looks at this whole photo, it's going to have a stroke. And what it's trying to do is auto detect the language, and having 5-6 different languages in one spot, it will not work very well. But if you do the Google Translate, you bring it into one of those columns, one of those groups, that'll get you where you need to be. You can cut and paste if you need to into the Google to translate it. But this is a strategy where if you know you have a lot of diversity in your class, if you know you have 3, 4, or 5 different languages being spoken, which is not weird, it happens. This is one option we have for trying to get the message across on what the student should be doing, what the expectation is. And if I'm going too fast, it's really hard to look at the slides and back here. Just somebody holler out on the voice, or hopefully someone can field them. Kind of hate not being able to see the room, to be honest. So another strategy, bilingual dictionaries. This is a resource that you can use. This is more useful for you than it is for the student. When you click on that link, you will come to this page here, and it's kind of slick because they're bilingual glossaries. So you scroll down past the math, past the English, because we don't teach boring subjects. We teach the awesome one. And eventually you find science. So this is cool. Any language you happen to, well, I'm assuming I haven't found one yet that I've needed that I've not found here. You can pop up into whatever language you happen to need, and it does a pretty decent job of giving you science-related words and the translation. Is this better than Google Translate? I don't know. Google Translate does make mistakes sometimes. specifically with the grammar, I've noticed. But this is a resource. This is an opportunity if you wanted to look ahead of time of what some vocabulary words might be, to prepare flashcards or prepare whatever it is that you need. This is available. Typically, though, this is kind of a planning resource tool. We use this to make things like this. So this is a bilingual glossary, and it is hopefully pretty self-explanatory. You have the word in English, you have the word in their primary language. One of the things that you should not be scared of is don't be scared of the students using their primary language. It's okay. Yes, we want them to use English. Yes, they're trying to immerse themselves and they're trying to learn it, but you can't ignore their prior education and you can't ignore the resources that they are already bringing to the classroom. If you've been in science for any length of time, you've heard the professional developments that talk about prior experience and how that colors understanding of different phenomenon, different events, and how sometimes it can be a real bear to change that based on what they've previously thought to be true or known to be true. Some of the students are coming with some pretty good knowledge from their native or their primary language. Use it. Encourage the kids to if you're having them write the definitions, encourage the kids to write it in both their language as well as English. It's something that's absolutely okay, and I will tell you, they get a lot of glee and a lot of happiness when uh, their parents and their families and folks come in and they see that native language incorporated into your different student products that you're putting up on the wall and that you're showing off. This is pretty huge. This is good generic one for everything, not just ELL. And you're going to notice that a lot of our interventions and a lot of our accommodations are good for both ELL and our special education population, or our population that struggles with literacy. It's good for many varieties of challenges. When you make your word wall, just instead of just putting up the word, put up a visual clue that helps them understand what that word is all about. Hugely, I can't tell you the number of kids that they come up and ask a question about what a word means. You point to the wall and suddenly, oh, I get it now. Definitely, that's a good one. Videos. We all use videos, whether they're 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. We use them. They're great. Good function to use in YouTube is this slow down function. You can adjust the play speed. So instead of playing it normal all the time, you can knock it back to 0.75 or 0.5. Typically, this is something I show the kids how to enable this, and I let them choose what's most comfortable for them. There are a couple of them, Crash Course Science, Crash Course Kids. The hostess speaks very rapidly. I'll typically put it on 0.75 for the entire class, just to slow it down a little bit so they're not trying to process quite so much. All of these are based on the PSYOP protocol. It's something called, oh Lord, what is it called? Sheltered Instructional Operating Protocols, or something to that effect. Basically, it's the idea that, if a kid needs scaffolding, which they all do, these are some of the scaffolds and these are some of the things that you can put into place to help them out. It is not just for ELL students. When we started implementing these 4 or 5 years ago, our SPED teachers absolutely raved about it and loved it. Similarly, if you have students that are struggling, they just not getting it, all of these strategies can be very powerful to help them out. So, lot of generic kind of advice right there. Let's actually talk about MyStar. Let's talk about what some different accommodations are going to look like by dissecting and taking apart these lessons. So first things first, if it's MyStar, you know that it is a problem-based unit, you know that there is the challenge that you keep referencing back to over and over and over again, and that challenge sets the context and sets that touchback point for students to continue to touch upon, to build their connections between, to tie everything together. So when we introduce the program or the problem, there's some things that we want to think about in order to make sure all of our students understand what the heck is going on. Some of the problems need a little bit more intervention than others. If a kid comes from certain areas and has certain resources, that's fantastic. Some of the kids have never seen, um, like a pavilion, for example. They don't understand what a pavilion is. Uh, there's just things we have to clarify. So 6.4 is the one that I want to talk about and hit upon. It is the one where a student is having a cell phone that is getting broken, and he needs to design a case in order to protect it from the forces of the world, from the random gym basketballs that keep hitting it and the bleacher drops and everything else. First thing recommended for the unit problem is think about illustrations, think about storyboards, think about busting that unit challenge apart so that they are able to really dig into it and to analyze it. These are products that ELL students at Millwood have created. They're definitely some of the better ones that have been created, but I really like pointing it out. First of all, I love this picture on the right. Like, I don't care what culture you are from, this kid has talent. Like, this is a resource that this kid is bringing into the school. This is a strength, and this is absolutely something that should be recognized and encouraged, and something that they can feel strong about, maybe in an environment where it's not always easy for them. So being able to do illustrations, being able to do drawings, seeing something is almost a universal language. It's much easier for all of your students to understand it. The other thing I want to point out is notice how much primary language is written on these different storyboards. It's not just you have to do it in English or else. It's okay for them to write down what they think is happening and describing the things that are happening in their primary. Um, Give them the opportunity. They may have stilted or limited understanding in English, especially with their writing. Remember, speaking English and writing English, two different skills. If you have a kid that understands things orally and he can speak or she can speak and communicate fairly effectively like that, but maybe their writing isn't so strong, this chance to write in primary language can be fantastic. If you need to check it, there's that Google Translate we talked about earlier. You can take your phone and fire up that app and just hold it over this picture. The phone will translate it real time. It takes you an extra 15 seconds compared to what you would typically do. So very, very minimally time consuming, minimally invasive. I think I ended up skipping a slide here, and that's okay. The other thing with, like I said, with the anchor or the unit problem, just make sure culturally it's something they get. One of the units that we talk about in 7th grade is living off the grid. That is a very difficult idea for some students to get across their head. Like, why in God's green earth do I want to go out into a field with no power and no plumbing and no heat and no infrastructure, no anything when it's all right here? Like, why is that a thing? The other one that was brought up, again, another 7th grade one, is the doghouse, where you have to insulate versus the heat and versus the cold. Our ELL coordinator pointed out to us that some cultures have very different relationships with dogs than we do. It may not be important to them, and that why would you build this luxury house for a dog? It'd be like asking us, why would you build a luxury house for a raccoon or something like that. So you got to kind of tweak it, and if you're really trying to get them to care about these problems and care about the understanding, just understand where they're coming from. So this video is not being played. So the anchor for this video, or for this lesson 6 point, probably 3 or 4, as we get into the specific lessons, this particular lesson starts with the video of a wrecking ball. And one thing to think about is why it is the context of what they're coming from. Some of these students are coming from places where they've been bombed. Some of these kids are coming from places where buildings are falling down, and it's not, and it's not something they want. It can be a trauma triggering thing. So before things like this, it's good to talk about the different why things are popping, why the building is coming down. They might not understand that when we use a wrecking ball to trash a building, to knock the building down, it's because we want to build something new. We're not trying to chase people out of their homes. We're not trying to destroy something, to hurt somebody. It's in the United States, it's fairly regular to tear down old buildings and put new ones in their place. Some places, they have buildings that are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, and maybe that's a cultural horror to them. We don't have too many of those, so it's always kind of good to talk about things like that. And I do apologize that this didn't show. Maybe. All right, I've been talking and talking and talking and talking, and I want to get you guys a chance to do something. So one of the things that we end up doing for our ELL students is we have modified versions of the lab. So what I have is 2 different versions of the collision lab for unit 6.4. It's where you take the pendulum and you crash it into a pop can and see the results of it. And what I would like to do is have you guys go into breakout rooms, and you're going to look at a before version, an unmodified version, and you're going to look at the after version, or what it looks like after we've changed things around for our ELL students. So your goal is to see what are the differences, what are the things that you notice. So, okay. So taking a look, make sure I'm sharing what I need to be sharing. Perfect. I'm seeing a lot of very excellent observations, and I'm seeing a lot of good questions. So I'm going to try to you've had a chance to look at things. Let's try and summarize kind of some of the modifications we made, and then some of the thinking, and answer some of the question. So first of all, I love MyStar. Really do. I spent many years working with MyStar. There are some wordy people on the MyStar team, and they love to make things very detailed and very eloquent and very long. So one of the things that you need to be cognitive of is, what can you trim? How do you get it down to the absolute core essentials? What prepositional phrases and what is the extra fluff that you can yank the heck out of there? There is certainly value, I think, to being able to read the more complicated and the higher level things. But for our ELL students, you're talking an elementary level at best, reading and writing ability from a lot of them in English, because it's not their primary language. So you want to shorten it. You don't want anything on there that isn't critical. Get to the point. Don't use the flowery language. Just yank it all out, trim it down. Color coding. You'll notice that the tables, for example, had different color shades. Different words can be highlighted. Anything that draws attention. Color coding and page layout, they're kind of the same thing. How can you visually organize this to be as easy to digest as possible? How can you draw the eye to important things? How can you separate things? How can you make it uh, discrete? The simplified instruction. additional images. Anytime you can show pictures referencing something, the lab tool that the student needs to use, instead of saying just use a graduated cylinder to measure 25 milliliters of water, have a picture of that graduated cylinder next to the instruction. If you really want to go for broke, have it, set to the 25 milliliters so you can show them exactly what it is you're expecting. Well, let's talk about the page first, then we'll talk about the other stuff. The simplification of the instruction with that can versus the 12-ounce soda. You're coming back into that tear out anything that's unnecessary, tear out anything that's too wordy, get to the absolute most basic stuff. And then think about what questions are manageable. Think about how you can rearrange things. Think about how you can, think about what you really want your ML students to get at. One of the things that's a little horrifying is you don't want to truncate and straight up make things easier. I really hope that as you're looking at the two labs, you didn't get the impression that one was greatly diminished compared to the other. It is not a very good modification to just hack an assignment in half. You really want to try and make sure that you are hitting those important elements and that you're demanding the same skills or similar skills from your ELL population. You're trying to make it manageable, and you're trying to make it something that where you're trying to scaffold it to their skill level. It might not be realistic to expect them to write a paragraph because they might not be there yet. But a sentence, where you boil it down to what are those critical understandings, that might be something that's a little bit more appropriate. I was going to flip back and forth, but I think I'm going to hit the questions here because Lord knows what I'm going to do when I'm going backwards in this. Does the removal of numbers or specific details help with understanding? The removal of clutter helps with understanding. So anything that you can do to get rid of the distractors, to get rid of the extra, to get rid of anything that can be a stumbling block, absolutely yes. Tear it out, but get it down to its fundamental things. Why isn't this used across the board to help students who require SPED? We use it for our SPED. My modifications are almost in lockstep. My very heavy ML class and my very heavy SPED class typically have they're super close to the same interventions, the same modifications. Absolutely encourage you to think about what the role of this with special education can be. And I get kids. I teach 6th grade, and I get kids that can't read, just flat out. I got that, and more of them have been like letter recognition type can't read. I mean, we're talking very, very, very limited. These are excellent interventions for them. Why is there no translated language on the modified copy? There can be. There absolutely can be. There's two big reasons. Number one, remember that you don't just have one language, or at least I never have one language. I've got 15 languages, and you're going to run into two problems. The first problem is you're going to just start taking up space like crazy when you're trying to account for every single language that you're putting on there. And the second one is if you're trying to make a universal copy, then you have more distractors because now you have languages and sentences and things like that the kid who's already struggling with English, he might not even recognize, or she might not even recognize it's not English. It's a completely different language. Could you modify them so that they are individual for every student with the language? You could, but I have to tell you, I mean, when you're making your modifications, you need to be a little bit realistic about the amount of work that they take and the amount of time that you're willing to spend with it. We have been growing our modified resource list for 5 years now. And we are just now to the point where pretty much every lesson is modified, but it's modified in a generic way. It's not modified for our Spanish speakers, and it's not modified for our French speakers specifically. You certainly can. And if you have a situation where, Battle Creek, we have a large Burmese population. So if you know that that Burmese population is established and you're going to need something for that, it might not be a bad choice. For us, realistically, it took quite a bit of time and coordination just to get the generic modifications in place, much less to do them for the different languages. Do you have to order different copies when it comes to workbooks, or does MyStar provide? I will be honest, I don't remember what MyStar has access to as far as these go. We did this at a school level, and I know that I shared them out to quite a few people, but I don't know that there is an official modification. If they wanted, I'm sure it wouldn't be any issue to provide it. But I mean, as far as the work print books and things like that, I think digital is probably going to be your best bet. And I don't mind sharing if you need something specific. Other things, simplified wording, visual prompts, color coding. Looks like we're seeing a lot of the same things. Lists instead of paragraphs. Yep. Think about your special ed modification. How often do you see chunking of instruction and things like that for a modification? Well, what's good for the ML students is good for the SPED. What's good for the SPED is good for the MLs. So both of those work. Graphic organizers, decreased text, reduced number of questions. Yes, just be cautious with reducing questions. You want to make sure that you're just getting rid of either ones that are completely unrealistic for them to tackle, whether it's because it's a cultural thing that they're not going to be familiar with, or if it's just strategic or technically too hard for them. These modifications do take extra time. It is not weird to be several days behind in the ML class, and that's something you have to get a little bit comfortable with. And I know we try to keep it together because of labs and things like that. So the way that you work around that is you pick and choose. What is it that's going to be the most bang for my buck? How am I going to keep things halfway in alignment so you're not setting up lab for 3 days in a row for 3 different classes versus what am I making easy or cutting out just to make my life easier? And sometimes you have to. Question: should students respond in primary language? That is up to you. I have a Spanish speaking student, and we use Pear Deck, which is a wonderful slide presentation tool with which students can share answers and things. And he almost always replies in Spanish. And when I get to his answer, I cut it and I paste it into Google Translate, and we share it that way to the class, and it works fantastically. And what I have found is that over time, that will naturally start to evolve into English. It starts to, they start to get more comfortable with the English. They start to use it more often. Sometimes you do have to nudge them out of their comfort zone, maybe using a couple of words of English mixed in with their primary. That's not too weird to see. Yes, the grammar can be jarring, but if they need to describe gravity and they don't really know the word for gravity in English, a lot of times they do in their primary, and then they can make it work. So immersion versus translation or modification versus translation. Those are two different questions. Our ELL teachers, the ones that run our newcomer program, want us to push using English. So if they're going to use the bathroom, if they're going to make requests and things like that, they really want the kids to practice English, to practice using English. We talk quite a bit about, I've spoken quite a bit about allowing the kids to use their primary language. They should, and you let them use the primary language when that's the tool that they need to use, because that's what they have access to. But you want a growth. You do want them shifting to English over time, and that might be months. It may be at the start of the year versus the end of the year, and that's fine. It's just nudge it, and then you'll have to just get a feel for it. Is the kid able to, or is it still beyond their reach yet? And you get a pretty good feel for it, especially when you start listening to them talking to their friends. You'll find out real quick how limber they are with the language. As far as modification versus translation goes, It depends on the size of the task. There are things like little formative assessments and things like that. A lot of times I'll just have them do the translation because I don't want to go through and modify, or I haven't had time to go through and modify the, 180 days worth of openers or whatever. The critical stuff is the stuff that tends to get the modifications, the more heavy duty with the extra pictures and the extra things. It takes time. Those visual dictionaries take a tremendous amount of time to put together because you need to think about the intuitive natural pictures and the diagrams and things like that. How are you going to get that idea across? um Precipitation's an easy one, right? You can put a picture of rain up there and it's pretty easy concept to understand. But how do you do a visual dictionary for a word like criteria or constraint? There are certainly things that can be done, but it takes a little bit more digging, takes a little bit more time to find those. Additionally, it is a bear finding culturally relevant related pictures to your target populations. The kids should be seeing things that look like them, and that includes when you're throwing pictures in on your word walls, on your labs, on things like that. It can't just all be white American, whatever. You've got to dig for different cultures, different ethnicities, different representations doing these activities because they do. Your trouble area is going to be, like I said, digging them up. How do you Google up an image of a kid in a hijab turning a electric generator to make electricity? You absolutely need to find pictures like that for some, at least some of the time, and it can be quite time consuming. So, modification versus translation. Translation's quick and dirty and easy, especially if you use Google Translate and you're doing it on the fly. Modification is your more structured. This is a super important lesson. I know what the trouble points are. I know that my kids are going to struggle with it. Here's where we're going to do it. I also don't know, and this is, you can kind of see it on the back here. There's red text that we put in the modified diagrams, and those we use as teacher reminders on things to do. One of the things, you're all science teachers. I don't know how many of you do it and how many of you don't. I would seriously consider modeling any sort of lab behavior, particularly when it comes to using instruments and how all of that goes. If you are able to kind of go through the motions and show the kids what they are going to be doing, the task that they are going to be performing, you will get much more consistent, much better results. I get it. Sometimes we want to do things where we are not surprising we're surprising the kids. We want them to uncover things and we want them to figure things out. You gotta pick and choose. What is it that is worth being all sneaky and trying to surprise the kids with, and what is worth just show them how to do it. This is how you measure your saturation point of paper towel. Go through the motions for one sample, let them dig through the rest. So after your lab situation, you end up getting into the uncover, or sorry, I apologize. We're still in the uncover. Um, this is kind of a fun one. You're making predictions, state. I am sure many of you have asked a question to your students and you get crickets. Kids are quiet. It's you ask them to make a prediction or what they think about something, and it is not good. They are not biting into it. One of the things that can be hugely productive is by creating a prediction word bank. And I'm not saying put down, don't write the prediction ahead of time, but give them a choice of results or a choice of words to use that they can then build their prediction off of. For example, you can put the word increase, decrease, stay the same. up on the board. And when you ask for a prediction using those 3 words, it can focus the kids quite a bit. When you are absolutely hot stuff and you are in an amazing position and you have the classroom environment just happen, you can have the kids make these word banks. Initially, personally, I would build them for the class until you kind of get a feel for it and until they get a feel for it, until they get a little bit more comfortable. But if you're having crickets, this is a phenomenal way of helping with those predictions, helping with the thoughts. So here we've got an example of the color coding. Charts really can be a struggle for our multilingual kids, like really, really be a struggle. One of the things, I don't know if you noticed, put 1 chart per page. Don't do more than 1. Whatever the data collection you are making, don't try to shove it all in one place. Put 1 chart on the page. It is impossible to see it with a digital thing like we're doing. Print on one side. Don't print back and forth. If you ever did textbook shopping back in the day, because I know we don't use textbooks anymore, but they talk about things like not having words, like the dashes. When a word is running too long in a paragraph and you continue it on the next, don't do things like that. Don't start a paragraph on one page and end the paragraph on the other page. You're really trying not to distract the kids with anything else. All right, sharing. So this is the talking phase. This is where they are communicating their findings. This is where they are doing the real meat and potatoes. If you're students learn socially, kind of a philosophy. Students build their understanding as a group, and in response to other understandings. If you're into your Vygotsky and all that, this is your wheelhouse. So the ML kids are quiet. You are going to have to pull teeth to get some of them to answer. Some of them will talk their full heads off. Yeah, there's always a couple, but most of them, they're not confident in their language, and it's so much easier to just kind of shrink and be quiet and not get called on. There are strategies that you can use to bring out those conversations. Absolute biggest one, the one that I recommend you all use, it's actually a talk move. I forget who gave if you do the MyStar thing, the talk moves I know pop up all the time. But turn to your shoulder partner, talk out an answer, come up with something at your table. If you're getting no responses, you call, nobody wants to try anything, have the kids turn to their shoulder partner and talk. You would be astonished how effective that is. That you get that beautiful buzz of engaged conversation. And once the kids have a chance to check it against a peer, so many more hands are going to come up, and you're going to get a lot more engagement on top of the conversations they had, the value of those. So that's huge. You have to warn your ELs ahead of time. You can't cold call them. If you cold call them, man, are you putting them on the spot. So in order to encourage your ELL students to participate, ask them to, warn them ahead of time. Yvette, I am going to ask you what processes are driven by gravity for water moving. So think about it. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, and then I'll go talk to somebody else, and then I come back and I get her answer. Having time to think, asking friends, repeating questions, bringing out things in L1. Be really careful of doing that orally, because it's unless you have a good ear for it, I struggle. But doing the L1 for the written responses, those work quite well. Sentence stems, something to get them started. Word banks, something to get them started. Drawing, if you have whiteboards, we always have kind of a rule where you can either draw it or you can write it, and that tends to work very well. Ideally, they do both. Have your resources, have the kids have those word walls and use them. If the kid's struggling, point to the stupid thing, remind them that it's there. It's astonishing how effective giving them 20 seconds to look at a word wall can be when they're formulating their answer. Um, you can do the translation. That's fine. It's more work, but it is an opportunity, especially if you have kind of a cluster of them. I need to get my charger real quick. So I'll be just a second.
Those prediction word banks seem really fun.
Yes, they are. And they're effective. I hate crickets in the classroom. So anything you can give, any life preserver that you can give the kids will help. All right, I'm plugged in. I'm sorry. I went from 35% to 7% to we're shutting down. So okay. Danger zone. You have got to be super, super, super careful of letting your ELL kids constantly sit together. I get it. You have one kid that is kind of strong in the language and they do all the translating, and it's so much easier because they can talk to them and everything is excellent and whatever. You have got to mix those groups up. I'm not saying all the time, but you have to give them some opportunity to pick different or to be in different groups, and you have to force them a little bit out of your comfort zone. It's great having a kid that speaks Arabic and another that speaks Swahili and another that speaks French and another that speaks English. It is phenomenal watching those groups work together. They figure it out and they do pretty well with it. Better than you would think. I'll put it that way. It's not always the English speaking native that dominates the group. You can really see some interesting interactions if you get them out of their comfort zone. Cannot just let all of the Farsi kids speak Farsi to each other. You have to split them up. And then there's just some standard stuff like the gallery walks, that ability to look at each other's work and to see what other people are doing. If your ML student or your special education student or something, if they're struggling and they just don't understand what's going on, man, Yanka, have them see what another kid's doing. And look at the project that another group is starting with and have them get that idea of, oh, this is what it's supposed to look like. You always get those students that finish early because they're just that darn good. Well, have them do some coaching and have them walk some of these kids through that are taking a little bit longer and help them out. You have to be careful because some of them really want to take over, but some of them they've got a velvet touch. They're very, they're very soft spoken and they understand their role as a coach, especially if you emphasize it. And then, the rephrasing, the agreeing and disagreeing, talk move again, trying to get the kids to do more interaction with one another than you during a classroom conversation. Is Josue, do you agree with what Fatima said? Things like that. Sentence stems, word banks, these things can absolutely help get conversations started. They can help guide things until, think of it like a plant. You're trying to grow a plant, you're trying to grow these skills. Well, sentence stems can be that scaffold initially to teach the kid how to put it into a format, or to teach the kid, what an if then statement is and that sequence of thought. So don't be scared of these. Lots of technology, Google Translate, Pear Deck, Kahoot. I mean, just use whatever it is that's out there. I love me some Pear Deck. Absolutely great for collecting responses and increasing participation. Assessments. I'm going to do assessments dirty. I'm going to be very brief with these because we want to make sure there's some time for Q&A, and this is a whole thing in and of itself. One of the things you really need to think about is your objective. What is it you are assessing? Are you assessing language or are you assessing content? If you're assessing vocabulary and things like that, then fine. It's absolutely hold them to that standard of the language. But if you are assessing content, you have to make a decision about what are you going to allow. Is the kid that doesn't write English very well, can he orally tell you his answer? If the kid is, has the good graph data and you're reading the conclusion and it's a train wreck of grammar and it's barely understandable, but the data looks good. Is the data what you cared about and the pattern what you cared about, or the results what you cared about, or is it that being able to draw a conclusion and write out a coherent conclusion? You should be very cautious about doing both. Don't nail a kid for both language and content unless they're married and you can't separate one from the other. When you're dealing with your assessments, try not to make things easier, but feel free to provide resources, the word banks, the labels, starting a drawing instead of having an intimidating blank box there. If you put a few critical key things, that can make a big difference. If I need to draw the water cycle, I can put a big blank box there, or I can add the mountain and the river and some different pieces so that the student has a starting point. Lab experiences are amazing because they give students a common touchstone. You really need to be thinking about what are some common experiences. Back in the day, I had a science teacher next door to me. And like all good science teachers, we were trying to use real life examples to bring the lesson home to the kids. And her example started with something along the lines of, when you take your skiing vacation in the Hamptons for 2 weeks every year, speaking to a Title I class that had, half of them had not left the city. You have to be cautious about things like that. What is an actual universal experience? If they're coming from an entirely different culture, an entirely different scenario, you got to be super careful about what is actually common. So the labs, the stuff that you do in class, you've seen them do it. So that helps to get those common touchstones. The language thing we talked about, and then a lot of the testing stuff is the same as the lab as far as making sure you're getting rid of clutter. You're being careful, don't get cute. That's what kills kids with tests, I swear. Don't get cute. Don't try to trap them. Don't try and look for, do they get this nuanced phrase? Ask them, the straight up skill. That's what you need to be testing. Just real quick, real generic stuff to talk about. Think about different brands. Kids love seeing things they recognize. So Vimto here is a Arabic soft drink or Arabic drink. The kids lose their minds when they see it present in the classroom. Similarly, think about what your kids are buying. If they're buying the store brand stuff because that's what the family can afford, then maybe they would appreciate seeing Sam's Cola instead of Coca-Cola. Culturally representative names. It takes 2 minutes to go into a worksheet and to change the name of whoever your example is to one of the kids in your class. They love seeing their names. And I'll tell you, like, you put in a culturally unique name like Abu Bakr, and it spreads like wildfire. I swear, like that entire group of kids say, "Oh, I saw such and such his name," and they eat it up. They love it. Slow down, wait. It's okay. Sometimes you have to let the pause get sort of pregnant, a little bit uncomfortable. You got to give the time they need. Sometimes they need some time to formulate. And if you're only doing 5 seconds and snap, 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 those poor kids' heads are spinning. So slow down. It's a good rule in general. Every time you can bring peers in, you should. I mean, anytime that they can do group work or develop consensus conversations about something, there's a whole line of educational philosophy behind that. And then just try and be practical with academic language versus language the kids might recognize. And again, your representation. So my last little bit here before we get into Q&A is to remember ELL kids are kids. The ELL kids like jokes. They like playing around. ELL kids love praise. They want to do well. They want you to tell them they're doing well. They like attention. I know they try to shrink sometimes, and sometimes they will hide from you, and they are the easiest kids to overlook because they never say a word, but they like that attention. You need to make sure you give it to them. The ELL kids like having friends. You know, they have families and they do activities out of school. They play sports you're not familiar with, and they eat food that is something that maybe you've never tried before, and they have holidays that you're unfamiliar with, and there's so many awesome things that they do out of the school that are important. They want to do well. They want to learn. They want to succeed. They're kids. You got to remember that they're not the burden or the inconvenience or something that you're just going to let slide through because it's impossible to teach them. It doesn't work that way. It's your job to teach them. And hopefully these are some things that help get you there. So I don't know if we have enough time for a breakout discussion or if we just want to do Q&A. I'm easy, whatever you want.
Yeah, this is a relatively small group and we don't have a lot of time left for breakouts, but you know, Kevin, oh my gosh, so much great stuff. So we'll just open up. If you have something you want to ask Kevin, if you want to unmute and just go ahead and speak, that would be great. If for some reason you'd prefer to put it in the chat, then you know we'll keep checking the chat too. So what would you like to
Tony,
know?
Sorry. I see Tony's mentioning AI there, and to me, that's when AI has made it, is when you can give them a worksheet in English and the AI will translate it into whatever it needs to be translated to.
Oh,
When I can take a picture of that and AI can fix it for me, now we're
yeah.
there.
I was actually thinking, Kevin, of, you know, when you need a, you know, Palestinian 14-year-old girl in a hijab using a 100mm graduated cylinder, like, and those pictures, some of those, you know, AIs that can take a prompt and make a lifelike picture could really help rather than crawling through Google Images or.
That's actually a really good idea. My playing with the AI photo has been very rudimentary. There's a lot of circles and swirls I noticed that they like to put in. But yeah, the realistic photos, that might be a great chance to do something like that. That's a great idea. I don't know how authentic it is with its 6 fingers or whatever, but
That would be the challenge, yeah.
yes, the send out the spy strategy. Yep, that's actually a really good job for some of them because as they go and as you know, if you have a kid that struggles a little bit with the language, it's great for them to see what other things are doing because they sort of get it a little more, and then by trying to communicate it, you know, it strengthens that. I think it's just a good strategy. Sending out the spy, if you aren't familiar with it, is when you send a student to look and see what the other students are doing, one from each group, and it works really, really well. If you've never done it, you think it's a hot mess, but it's a great strategy. So what else would you like to know? It's all doable, I promise. Build it over time, though.
Well,
It's
that build over time, I want to work smarter, not harder, right? So
Mhm.
in like 7th grade, like I'm already like I have a bank of images that I've made with Google Draw. But wouldn't it be nice if there was just a bank of images with MyStar that, they use that you could easily copy into Google Draw and fix there? Like, is
So
there
the good
some
news
space?
is, I think I have one for all of the vocabulary. I think I have visual vocab for all 3 grades, or at least the vast majority of them.
Okay.
So I don't mind sharing that if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah. I see like little labs too, because like I'm in 8th grade. It's been updated. The lab's been updated. And like we're heating up globes and like counting grids on grid paper with flashlights. I'm like trying to like airplane model, attendance show, what the expectation is of all these things. But I was like, oh, when making the directions, they were just a whole page of directions. So I wanted to have it pictures, but I got really fatigued and looking for every picture for the directions. So just yeah.
100%. Yep. It's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. I know 7th grade has some modified labs, but the thing is we don't do every unit. So I'm not sure. I'll have to take a look and
Mhm.
see what we got kicking around. I do 6th grade, so I'm in good shape.
Yeah, and I like the updates, and I always push our departments to use anything that was updated. But that's always my pushback is we just finally got some modifications, and I was like, I know. I just feel like we're in the same hamster wheel for a while.
Yep. I will give Chris access to things that I'll have to dig through a lot of links and kind of do some sort of a file dump, but I'll get those resources organized and send them to her, and then she can distribute as she sees fit.
Thanks.
Much appreciated.
That's awesome.
Did you hear me assign you extra work there, Chris?
No, that's not extra work. That's super easy. I have a list of everybody who is here, and it's, once I have it, I can send an email out easily. Thank you. Appreciate that very much, Kevin. Kevin, if you want to maybe I'm gonna stop sharing your screen, and I'm just gonna go over the last couple slides, and then we will, at least I will, and a few of us will hang out. If there are things that you want to know that you did not, get the answers to yet, and it is almost 5 o'clock, so you don't want to hold anybody late, because everybody has things to do. But if there's something, on your mind that you want to know that you didn't have time to ask, we'll hang out for a little bit. So we have a couple of upcoming things that you might want to know about on Thursday. Barb is going to be with us and Robin Allen from Midland, and they're going to talk about standards-based grading with MyStar assessments. It's our assessment series. And then after that, our next upcoming activity is Phase 2 system model. So if you want to know more about system models and system modeling and how to get your kids modeling with inputs and outputs and all that good stuff, that's available on November 4th. And then a couple of us are going to NSTA the first weekend in November, and we're doing some presentations on claim evidence reasoning and some on differentiation, and one on standards-based grading with 3D assessment. And we're going to kind of compile those and do some highlights from those 3 topics on Monday, November 11th. So those are available if you're interested. We encourage you to continue to connect with us on Facebook and join that Facebook group. The group is it's a private group. You have to be MyStar teacher with a subscription to be in the group. We don't let random people or administrators or anybody else join that group, so you can feel comfortable there, asking questions and things like that. So we'd love to see you. And we thank you so much. And I know a couple of you have already put things in the chat, that you appreciated Kevin's time today, but if there's one thing that you got as a takeaway today, we'd love to see that in the chat. And then there is a link for feedback, and we do listen to your feedback, as you know. So if you would like to leave us some feedback on that link, that would be great. And so again, thank you for your time. It's a busy, crazy time of year, and we do appreciate you spending time with us. I'll send out sketch information tomorrow. when I get the image bank information from Kevin, I'll share that with all of you as well. And Lindsay will be sending out the video recording and the agenda and the slides within the next week or so. So you'll have all of those as resources. So if you're good to go today, you know, please drop something in the chat that you learned or you liked, and then feel free to log out. And if you do have something that you want to know, we'll hang out for a little bit and make sure that all your questions are answered. So thanks. Have a good evening, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.